Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our wonderful event with two of our good friends here. My name is Greg Salyer. I'm the president of the Philosophical Research Society. And if you don't know us, well, if you do know us, thank you. If you don't know us, just briefly, we were founded in 1934 by a scholar of all things, basically, named Manly Palmer Hall. And his mission in creating the Philosophical Research Society was to provide resources for seekers, people on their paths. Didn't matter which path it was. And so we have a magnificent library of Manly Hall's works that include everything from Buddhism to contemporary psychology to literature. And we continue that mission today. And I'm very happy to introduce two of our friends who help us continue that mission. That is Mandy Kahn and Marina Pacowski. Now, you may wonder why a philosophical research society would have poets and musicians. Well, we like words here. Words are awesome, but words aren't everything. In fact, there's some ways to wisdom that really involve words used in different ways, like poetry and especially music. And our two friends here have a wonderful convergence of words and music. We also have an art gallery here and promote artists. And in fact, Mandy Kahn there is our artist in residence and doing a great job, even though she's very yellow. No, that's a filter. She likes it. Anyway, welcome. We're so glad you're here. If you're interested in it, other things we do at the Philosophical Research Society, prs.org. Lots of good stuff happening. But for now, Mandy Kahn and Marina Pacowski.
Thank you so much, Greg, for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here. So I would like, first of all, to thank the Philosophical Research Society for having me, for the unwavering support and enthusiasm regarding my project, and namely Greg Salyer, Kelly Carmina, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Mandy Kahn, who is a published international poet. Her poetry has been heard in the whole world, really. She's going to be the subject of a documentary very soon about her project about peace. She has been teaching, and she still teaches classes about peace, which are really phenomenal. I have had the real pleasure to be invited to some of them, and it's wonderful. So, to go directly into the subject of today, what made the composers of what we call classical music come through this century until us? That's a good question, isn't it? So, for example, Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, 300 years ago, Chopin, 2.5 centuries ago, etc. So by really studying them and reading many different sources, we can tell that usually these composers were really what we would call today hip personalities. They could have been the Prince or Miles Davis or Lady Gaga, if that's a reference from nowadays. They all have in common usually prodigy, virtuosity, and being really child prodigy at a really young age. Usually they have some quirks, some funny story and some fun facts about their life, and also these funny stories and facts came until us. So today I chose a few of the composers that I really worship. It's impossible in 1 hour-ish to do them all. So maybe there will be some other series of other composers. And of course, each composer would deserve a 1 hour or 2 hours biography, which will not happen tonight. So it's going to be a short little biography about all of them. And I hope to infuse some curiosity to go further about them. So I will have two disclaimers. I hope we say so in English. So first, a disclaimer. Well, you will need, unfortunately, to cope with my mispronunciation of your beautiful language. As some of you know, I'm from France, and the musicality of your language sometimes is not yet in my mouth. So that's the first thing. And second thing, if you hear one word for another or some English word that sounds like French, it is part of the show. I can assure you it is part of the show, and it was planned. And last thing, doing this from my living room on Sunset Boulevard, just like the movie Sunset Boulevard, things happen, and I apologize in advance for any sirens, helicopters, or others event happening in my lovely, legendary boulevard, Sunset Boulevard. So let's get started with Bach. Bach was a giant in music. He was often called the father of music. He was born at the middle of the at the end of the 17th century in 1685, and passed away in the middle of the 18th century in 1750. He is still revered and admired by nowadays musicians like Brad Meldo, like Keith Jarrett, who devoted an entire integral to his music. Before that, the Beatles talked highly about him. After his time, he influenced Mozart to Mendelssohn, Brahms to Arvo Pärt. Why? His music was really hyper complex harmonically, but in the same time really balanced, putting the audience on a kind of balanced mood and atmosphere. There are much more to say, of course, about his music, but I'm just gonna stop there for his music. He was prolific, you can say so, and industrious in everything he did. He fathered 20 child, that's a lot of child, 7 with his first wife, who happened to be his cousin. And when his cousin passed away, he didn't waste any time. He remarried immediately after with a very talented young coloratura soprano, Anna Magdalena Bach. And here we go, he had 13 more children, yay! So that's Bach. He left us more than 1,000 pieces of music. Even after his death, people found some more music non-published. He became an orphan at the age of 10 from a very musical family. Everybody would play in his family. He followed his brother, who was himself a musician, and was noticed early in age as a wonderful organ player by the Duke of Weimar. So the Duke of Weimar, or Weimar as we say in French actually, hired him to play music, but not only music, he had to do housework too. He didn't like that. And Bach was known as being really having a pattern of strong antagonism. So he tried to leave with high words, and he was put in jail for a month. That didn't stop him. Right after he was free from jail, he just fled by foot to go see a concert of one of his friends, Buxtehude, just at 200 miles away. Just that. And he did it by foot. He did well because there he was noticed by the Prince of Leipzig. And then he got a better job, like the job of really composing the music he wanted. And it could be sacred music, it could be secular music, and this he really loved it. So to give you an example, he was asked to compose some cantatas once a week. So I don't know if you visualize that. Like a cantata usually is about 20-25 minutes. So it would be like, you know, half 40 minutes pop stars nowadays CD. And he had to do that every week for a while. So that's Bach, prolific, industrious, tempered man. Some anecdote came to us that he fought with a dagger with a bassoon player because he didn't like his rendition. I think he had words with a musical critic who didn't like one of his pieces, and I think he wasn't shy about his language. And many others stories like that. So at the end of his life, he had some eyes problem, and he got a surgery by the point of eye surgery at this time. Unfortunately, this point of surgery just missed him, so it didn't turn out well, and very soon after he had a stroke, and people think that it was because his health really deteriorated after this surgery. So after this long introduction, I'm going to play for you one of the movement of one of his partita for piano, so the jig. It's pretty virtuoso, so that's good to warm up my little fingers on the beginning of this show. And right after, I will talk about one of his devoted disciples before to give the mic to Mandy. So here we go, partita jig from the first partita. Yeah. I'm gonna remove this headphone. And that was it. I think 1 minute and a half of fast music. So let's come back through this composition to Bach. 2.5 centuries later, a pianist himself really quirky, really fell in love madly with his music and decided to record everything from Bach and devoted almost all his life to Bach. His name is Gould. He had so many quirks himself. Mandy knows even more about him than myself. And one of them would be to wash his hands under really boiling water. And we were not even in the time of COVID, right? So that was one of his quirks. And the other things, maybe not a quirk, but really something, he would carry a chair, a bench chair for his piano, everywhere he would tour in the world. And that's about it. That Mandy wrote a wonderful poem, and I will give the mic to Mandy. Thank you.
Very, very grateful to be here. Well, the speaker in this first poem that I'll share is a chair, Glenn Gould's chair. He carried me from place to place, would play nothing without me. It wasn't that he knew I'd raise him only 14 inches high. A man he loved, his father, had made me for him. The world's too full of people, things, of chairs. Every year there's talk of something better in the new. But those who've never sat on something pulled for you from solid wood can't know. Only I can say how I was made, and I remember gingerly.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. So on this, I'm going to play a piece that I'm sure you all know, which is really famous, and of course it's the first prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, another monumental work by Johann Sebastian Bach. I'm going to remove this. Thank you very much, and thank you, Johann Sebastian Bach, for giving this to us. So I'm going to talk about another giant. So this other giant was Beethoven, born in Germany in 1770. I was going to say it in French, and passed away in Vienna, Austria in 1827. He was known to be pretty moody, taciturn, solitary. No surprise, right? A lot of composers, a lot of artists are that way. And Beethoven had on his shoulder the power and the responsibility to do the junction, to make the junction between classical era and romantic era. Romanticism in music, what is it? Well, that was the allowance of displaying emotions, feelings, torments from the soul and the heart through music. Pretty revolutionary, right? So that's what he did. He also had acquaintances with the famous poet Gould, with whom he had a lot of correspondence, and they worked also together. So Beethoven will progressively go almost deaf, not totally, but almost deaf, at the age of 32. It is believed that it is after contracting the illness, I said it in French, again, typhus. I hope I pronounced that right. Despite that, he composed after this his major works, 9 symphonies, 32 sonatas, 16 string quartet, 4 ouvertures, and some other things, and some leaders, and many other things. All of this with being affected with the most serious illness for a composer or a musician, which is ears. His only love, to talk about his love life, should I say love, because unfortunately it was unrequited, was for a young countess, Giulietta Guiccardi. And I think it's a difference of class, unfortunately, who made this love not possible. But he still dedicated to her one of his most beautiful sonatas, the one I'm aiming to play for you now, which is a Moonlight Sonata. So I'm going to play the first movement, and you see already Moonlight Sonata at this time was pretty revolutionary, to not have the traditional, first sonata, second sonata. I see that I have few students of mine in this room today, and I'm going to dedicate this to them because I had the hard task for certain to cope with my teaching and learn this first movement. So I'm going to play that and for all of you, and a special dedication to them. Right, so Moonlight Sonata.
Wonderful.
Love poem. If we slept in tandem, nude and nude, breathing in each other's cycled air, windows shut, door to the bedroom shut, light through pleated shears, only a filtered light. Would we, after one night's steady hours, wake to find we'd let our edges change? We're enough alike that, wrapped in chrysalis, what would melt and pool and form again would be hewn of two close marbled shades, grades of a single color, emerald and pine, and only the depth would be new, depth and dimension. I have been emerald, my dear, that cold, bright hue that's made from the whole earth and all time. And you, my love, my darling, have been pine, earthly too, but stalk of waving air. Let us be hard and soft now, green within greener, marbled, drawn to a center, fragrant and glittering.
Oh, wow. Mandy's poetry. So with our transition to this beauty, I'm going to talk about Robert Schumann. So Robert Schumann is one of my favorite. He could incarnate with Chopin, whom I'm going to talk later on, the Romanticism movement after the fathers, Beethoven, introduced it to the world. So Schumann was born in 1810. He passed away in 1856 in Germany. So Schumann, to go right to the point, had hallucinations, auditive hallucination, and at some point he even jumped into the river, the Rhine, and was rescued in extremis, but was put in an asylum until the rest of his life. So let's rewind and go into a flashback to his life. So he was a child prodigy. He was raised by a father who was a publisher and reviewist. Schumann himself wrote his first essay about poetry, about beauty, and about music as a teenager. He studied piano, but parallelly pursued a career in law, which was a tradition in the family. Later on, he got to study with Professor Vick. And that's when happened what happened. He fell in love for Vick's daughter, to whom he was teaching the piano as well, Clara. And you cannot think about Schumann and listen to his music without associating Clara and his love life, because these two had, I don't lie, like 2 books of letters and correspondences. Back in my country, in France, I did a whole show about Schumann and read some of these letters. Of course, Professor Vick didn't want of this union because, as a teacher, he could tell from the beginning that Schumann really had too many quirks, to say it that way. I love this English word, and would probably go mad at some point, which he was absolutely right about. So it was a long battle for these two to get engaged, and finally in 1839, when Clara was old enough, they actually sued the father and they won the process and they were allowed to marry each other. I have lots of things to say about Schumann's other quirks. So he and Clara was 2 virtuoso pianist. But at some point, and as I have students here in the room, I'm happy to say that he wanted to strengthen his fourth finger with a machine. You know, in piano playing, the weak fingers are always the four and the pinky. So that's why generation and generation of pianists do scales and Hanon and, you know. But Schumann wanted to go faster, and he put this machinery which would, like, you know, lift his fingers, and he destroyed his fingers. So his career was, as a pianist, was ruined for the rest of his life. And basically, Clara became his interpret, and he devoted all his time to composition. He composed mainly for piano. He had the title of this piece were very often influenced by characters that he met, by animals like papillons, butterflies, by some of people he admired like Chopin. There is a piece which name is Chopin. The extract of the piece that I'm going to play for you is an extract of Carnival of Vienna, so it's another colorful image for composition. So we are far from the classical sonata, scherzo, etc. So at the end of his life, like I said, he had more and more hallucinations, and the end of that was that he jumped into the Rhine, into the river, and then was sent to the asylum for 2 more years, where he suffered a lot, plus the treatments at the time over there was certainly not gentle. And he died there in 1856. He was surrounded by Clara and by the youngest Johannes Brahms, who was really in love with the two of them, and a great disciple from Schumann. Clara will say later on about the first time she saw Schumann and she said goodbye to him, that this last hug, she would give all the gold in the world for this last hug with Schumann. That would almost make me tear up, and I read this story so many times, but it's really touching, right? And she never remarried, by the way. So I'm going to play this intermezzo from the Carnival of Vienna. Am I right? Yes, it's a piano first in my unfolding of the event. All right.
Coda. The day you know a love will end, but months before that end will come, you watch your own life moving through a tube from years beyond your age. Wasn't it lovely, you think to yourself, the day we walked under wavering elms in the first cool wind of the autumn? Even in that wind, wasn't he handsome, you think to yourself? The collar is up on his hand-me-down coat. His face is turned up to the buildings that make him a thimble. He's young as you've ever known him to be as you walk along in the warm, wet gut of your life. This is Coda, the moving, the tube, the day cast suddenly gold. The moment paused like wind had whirled it up.
That's beautiful. The moment where you know a love will end. So true. So that's a wonderful transition to go to one of my favorite too. They're all my favorite actually. Chopin, Frédéric Chopin. So I pronounce it in a French way because even if he was born in Poland in 1811, he moved at the age of 19 to Paris, and he will spend the rest of his life there. And he is buried at the cimetière of the Père Lachaise, for those who know a little bit of Paris. So he's also a virtuoso pianist, child prodigy, wrote many compositions for the piano. He incarnates also romantic music. He always had a very fragile health, suffered like chronic coughing, tuberculosis. Some have said about him that he was a little bit hypochondriac, if I can say so in English. I hope that's a good pronunciation. So even if he performed a lot when he was a child, once he moved to Paris, he performed only 30 times in his entire life in big halls. And of course, those of us who are pianists can understand the fact of loving music, but the pressure that are on our shoulders whenever we performed in front of an audience, and the nerves, and maybe Chopin couldn't do that. So most of his life he actually supported himself financially by writing music, some of the most beautiful pages of the piano. He too didn't write a lot for other instruments. He did few sonatas for cello, but that's about it. He didn't compose any symphony. What to tell? So he had also, yes, one thing amazing is that he knew Franz Liszt, the other virtuoso of this era, and the two of them had this friendship, like we say in French, like dog and cat. Like they were friends, then they would fight over the same woman, then there would be some overlapping, then they would reconcile again, then they would play in the saloon even four hands. And it is said in the stories that sometimes Chopin would play the piano and Liszt would be down the piano just playing the pedal with his hands. So some stories like that. Regarding his love life, he had a brief union when he arrived in Paris, and I need to read that name because it's a Polish name, so it's Maria Wozinska. Although I should be able with my own name to pronounce that right. This union didn't last long, and he very early, very soon after, met a writer. The writer's name was George Sand, and although she had a male name, she was a woman, but she chose to take a male name because at the time it was very difficult to be a writer and a published writer. And she was kind of the opposite of Chopin. Chopin was really, you know, a frail stature and always, you know, tired and ill. And she would smoke cigars. She would have some male clothes. She would drink a little. So all this to say that their union was really troubled. And unfortunately for Chopin, at the end of his life, when his health deteriorated further, they split. Although they never lived together, but they split. And Chopin was almost on his own, alone, when he passed away. Few friends, his sister. So that's pretty sad ending, which match his music most of the time. And a quirk of Chopin, as I said, I would tell some funny story, and I guess it's the right time because soon it is Halloween, and I have a spooky story about Chopin actually. One of his fear was to be buried alive. So he had expressively wrote to his sister to say that the day he would die, he wanted his heart be ready. It's really spooky. There are really kids in a young age, just put a headphone. So he asked to have his heart removed from his body and taken back to Poland. So that was the first fear, to be buried alive. So he wanted to really check that he was really dead. And secondly, although he was French and he had a nationality, he always considered his Poland country natal like his country, and he always felt a little bit guilty to have left his country. So I'm going to play for you. So I'm looking at the time. So I was about to play one waltz, but as the time is passing by, which I knew in advance, I'm going to play one of his shortest composition, which is the Waltz of the Little Dog. And why is it called like this? It's because George Sand had a new little puppy, and she asked Chopin, who was a great improviser, to improvise just like that, a little waltz, which would like imitate the fact that the dog would chase and run after his tail, you know, like little puppies do usually. So it's a pretty fast waltz, so pray for me. Thank you. It's good for the fingers.
Eric Satie. On that final morning, I couldn't join my comrades as they hurried to collect their things and wedge them into bags. Those boots and leather vests and feather head straps. We were minstrels. Those packages of chewing gum, those knee socks and suspenders, they dug from the collective pile we'd slept in for a week, which broke apart. Light pushed in. I stood against a wall and chewed my hair. We were young in Denmark and would not be again. That is what his shortest pieces know. The morning you are leaving before you go. Last light, last apportioned kiss, last bright flash of moccasins and breath. They sing the shape of the known world, the one you've worn like moccasins, the sadness. Your jar can only hold so much.
Wow. So Mandy made the perfect transition with one of her beautiful poem. I mean, all her poems are just like pure beauty. To a French composer, Eric Satie, and boom, we are in the 20th century, a very creative century for French composers. So he was born in Paris in 1966, dies in, 1866. The numbers and me in English is still a struggle, as you noticed. So 1866, and he dies in Paris in 1925. So he is known as one of the most eccentric, weird personalities. So of course I have lots of anecdotes about him. I'm gonna just tell a few. First of all, he was also a young prodigy like them all. He wants to enter the famous Conservatory of Paris. He is refused 2 times. Jury says, no talent, unworthy of this school. He finally enters there. He is expelled from there 2 times. Teacher said he's the laziest student of the conservatory, the less gifted for piano. One of them says, well, he has some talent for composition, maybe. So this maybe about Satie left us a tremendous amount of music. Some of them were discovered again after his death. I'm going to play for you later on one of the top or maybe number 1 pieces played in the whole world, which is his first gymnopédie. He composed this first gymnopédie in 1688. He was 22. He was 22, and despite he died in a very poor way, in a really kind of hoarded apartment, he was not really rich during his life, and if he had survived, he would be now a multi-billionaire or millionaire, because this piece has been played so many times. So stories in between this. So he's the one, by his creativity, originality, the fact that he didn't fit the rigorous school of Paris, who really invented a certain modernity in music. He was also doing some piano bar at an institution in Paris, in Montmartre, which was called the Black Cat. So we have a Black Cat here in LA, in Silver Lake, but it's not the same. And probably the fact that he was, meeting some poets, playing all sorts of music by ear, influenced his way of composition. He composed some really minimalist pieces, and with some very sophisticated and jazzy harmony, and playing some 7th or 9th for the professionals. And he gave some really awkward name to his compositions. For example, there was a Mr. Fish. Then there was this, I need to read it because it's a new word for me, two flabby songs for a dog. So I know what flabby means in French now, but it's kind of funny, right? He also composed a piece after the only love that we think he had with his next door neighbor, who was a painter, Suzanne Valadin. And after she left him, because she was even more eccentric than him, he could never like really recover from that. And he composed a piece which name is Vexation. Vexation in English would be maybe a vexation, maybe, or to be vexed, you know. And this piece is composed of a short motif, and he expressively asks it to be played 840 times in a row without a break. So you can hear a few of these interpretations on YouTube. It lasts 20 hours. So if you have one of these days where you don't know what to do and you are curious about that, well, you can put this. He's the first also who invented the concept of lounge music, ambient music. He would say about his own music that it was furniture music. Modest, right? So he had a lot of quirks. So of course I found even more than what I knew about him. So he said that he could only eat some white food. So white eggs, white fish, oysters, like everything white. He claimed that he needed a very precise schedule, and he wrote in his journal things like, I need to get up at 7:18, then I take my breakfast from 7:20 till 7:23, and so on, very precisely that way. That was another quirk. He also was part of a sect at the very beginning of his Parisian life, and being not in accordance with the precept, he just founded his own sect, and he was the only member of this sect. So that's another thing about him. Some other things to tell about him. Yes, in the 10 last years of his life, he got a little money from an inheritance, and instead of having a better apartment, he bought 10 identical cœur de roi suits. And he wore them for the 10 last years of his life, like just one after the other. And he was then called Mr. Velvet Gentleman. Then happened a time where he is in this little room in Paris, and no one is allowed to enter his room except him. And when he died, some of his friends came into his apartment and found like the modern hoarders, you know, during the pandemic. So that's how was Satie. So an indescribable disorder in his place. 2 grand pianos. So I already have one in my room, and it takes so much room that I had to sacrifice my couch for it. So he had 2 of them stacked one above the other, one for the composition, and the one for the composition was the upper one, so he had to climb on it, and the bottom one was to put all of his thousands of unopened mail. So that was Satie. It was found also in his apartment 100 of umbrellas. That was the music of Satie, and that was the character of Satie. So really an eccentric, right? So I'm going to play now, so his famous piece, the first gymnopédie, that then made him really famous until us, and I hope for a long time after. So you'll hear it's a pretty sophisticated harmonies too. Thank you.
Claire de Lune. 3 weeks I've listened to Claire de Lune. Is it beauty or sadness? It's seeing you, my life once, at a bright cafe and not saying hello. It's what we do not voice, but know.
Thank you so much. So that was Clair de Lune de Debussy, introduced superbly by Mandy's poem. And so we are now talking about him and the last poem, the last composers of the evening. And thank you for sticking with us, Maurice Ravel. So I associated the two of them because they were named like impressionist composers. Themselves didn't like so much to be called really in a rigid way, but for sure they got their inspiration from the movement of the impressionism in painting, with Cézanne, Manet, Pissarro, and also the symbolism in poetry, Mallarmé, Verlaine, and all the great poets of the 19th century and beginning of 20th century. So to talk briefly about Debussy, he grew up in the suburb of Paris. His father had a china shop. He too was really a prodigy because he entered the conservatory at the age of 10 years old, and he got awarded with a Prix de Rome, although he was also not really in good favor of his teacher at the conservatory, because him too had some antagonism. He didn't like the music there, and he already had his way. So he went to Rome, and there, of course, experienced a lot of music, composed a lot of things. And when he returned home to Paris, he first got his inspirations from Wagner's, but then got away from Wagner's music because he found it too dramatic. And also I think he became a little bit anti-Germanic because it was the beginning of the First World War. Let's reminding that Debussy was born, I forgot to mention that, in 1862, and he passed away in 1918. He had a very tumultuous love life, and because of that, he got a lot of enemies at the end of his life. He got involved with Lily Texier, who was a strong character but not very passionate by music, and so he fell in love for Emma Bardak, and this was a great love. And he leaves Lily Texier, and what does Lily Texier do? She shot herself in the chest. So in this Paris, it's not even like nowadays on Sunset Boulevard, you know, it's really a big scandal. She doesn't die of it, but the bullet will stay in her body for the rest of her life. So he has to flee Paris with Emma. They will have a daughter, Chouchou, and in fact Chouchou, his daughter, will be the child that will really makes Debussy happy, and he will compose for her lots of things, including this Clair de Lune, which is part of a suite. And he passed away in 1918, also in a climate of indifference, because it was still the First World War, and he didn't have any sumptuous funerals, although he was really famous on his time. He was really acknowledged by his pair like a great composer. He revolutionized the way music was composed with what we call open form, and in 1905, and that will be the last detail about him, he composed his major revolutionary piece, La Mer, the Sea. So let's go without transition with Ravel, and that will be the final of this evening. So Ravel was born in Cibourg. Cibourg is in the west southern of France, and actually it's where I was born, like really like few kilometers from that. So this is what we call the Basque Country, and it is close to the Spanish border. And if you hear Ravel's music, there are a lot of Spain that you can hear in his music, and included, of course, the famous bolero, right? So he also entered the conservatory at a young age. They are all this in common, that they are prodigy. At the age of 14, he didn't have any price. He will be bitter about this all his life, you know, always like the hip persons at the time had a hard time. His writing is almost for piano. He was really influenced by Chopin virtuosistic style. And his form was pretty classical, influenced by ancient dances. One fun anecdote about him: he applied during the war to be in the army, but he was refused. Actually, it's not so fun because he was considered too short and too frail, and so he applied as a volunteer to be an ambulance driver. I will see if it's a correct pronunciation. Yes, I think we say ambulance, right? Ambulance driver. He spent almost all his life in France. Also, he did one great trip, which is really interesting for me because it was a trip in America. And in America, he got to meet George Gershwin and he got to meet Charlie Chaplin. Isn't that fabulous? So that was his only trip, but wow. So he was pretty solitary. No one has ever known if he had any love life. He was also very secretive. And all his music is also full of mystery, intimacy, like that. And that's also what is always like thrilling, because we enter a world of fantasy and dream when we enter in his music. In 1932, he contracted what we call nowadays the Alzheimer's disease, so a sort of dementia, and that was terrible because day by day he couldn't write, and he died 5 years later after contracting this illness. So him too is really considered as an impressionism by his harmony, and also because all his music kind of imitates the motion of water, the motion of nature, the wind in the leaves, and that's what the painters, the Impressionist one, tried to imitate. So that's why he was called, and Debussy was called that way too. So it is now going to be the big final, and for that I of course invited my friend Mandy, and I want to say 2 more words about Mandy. So I called Mandy with a lot of affection a double whammy, because first of all, Mandy is the one who introduced me to the Philosophical Research Society, and for that I am forever grateful, because in my early days here in Los Angeles, that was like entering a heaven, you know, of peace and the kingdom that I was familiar with, my mother being really like a sort of intellectual and reading a lot. So it was so great for me. And then to meet the extraordinary Greg Sawyer and Kelly Carmena, to whom I cannot, you know, thank enough for their support. And why is Mandy a double whammy? Because of course, as you heard, she wrote all these poems about composers. So that was so great for my show tonight, right? So, and a fun anecdote, as we are in the fun anecdote, Mandy happens to be my cousins through my brothers. That's a bit personal and complicated, but I thought it was funny to say that, and I'm so happy that I kind of have a family in Los Angeles. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So I asked her if it was possible to layer her poetry. She teaches at the Philosophical Research Society a class about peace, and it is extraordinary. And I heard all these poems from her and words of wisdom. And so I thought that to play above the second movement of the Sonatina by Maurice Ravel would be great. As she's very musical, at the beginning she said, please say it to the audience, because I love music so much and I don't want to put my words on it, but I thought it would be so beautiful, and so I'm thrilled to hear that. I want to thank all of you for your support, for being here tonight. Again, a huge thank you to Greg, to Kelly, also to Whitney, who helped do these beautiful flyers that you saw with Chagall's inspiration. So I'm very grateful for that. And the next event will be on November 12th, and there will be many other surprises. But for now, let's play some Maurice Ravel.
space be the time. Let ours be the generation that sees a world arrive, that honors all people. That honors the land, that sees all bodies of water as holy. A world in which all are perfectly free, and by way of that freedom are themselves, and by way of that selfhood glow with peace. Let the time, let ours be the world. Peace is our deepest component. Evolving in peace, never about changing the self. It's about honoring the self so completely and so without judgment that one lifts to a lighter expression of itself. And enters the octave of peace. Is an experience of equality and spectacular honoring of all beings. And of the self as a member of the all.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you to all of you for being here. I know it's the last presidential debate, and so thank you for being with us, and I hope that poetry and music will have you have a peaceful mind before this last debate. Thank you to Mandy for being an extraordinary guest and treating us with her poetry. Yeah, thank you, Greg Salyer. Thank you, Kelly Carmina. Thank you, Whitney. What you did is extraordinary. It's extraordinary to be able to give birth and life to a project that was dear to me from even more than a year. And that's so thrilling, and I can't thank you enough. And I'm so thrilled of the future collaborations. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.